For the last session, it's my pleasure to introduce those who really don't need an introduction. So Fernando, Anna Ruvalcaba, Jason Grout, and Afshin Darian, who, on behalf of the Jupyter Executive Council, will present a Jupyter Community State of the Union. Thank you. Please give them a round of applause.
Thanks, Sylvain. Thanks, everyone. First to the organizers of this amazing event, where we're speaking today on behalf of the four of us, but also of the rest of this Jupyter Executive Council, Brian Granger from AWS and Steve Sylvester from MongoDB, who could not be here in person. So this talk is really on behalf of all six of us, and our job is really to represent the Jupyter community. Jupyter is a large community. It's amazing to see all of you here. We're a community of people who build tools. Some of them are represented in this lovely diagram from the Turing Way. Some of them are things that we've been learning about today. The project began a long time ago as something much smaller, back in 2001 when it was only IPython, but 22 years have gone by. It's a long time, and today the scope of what we do is huge, not only in terms of software, but in terms of activities, conferences like this one, involvement in education and big research programs, et cetera. How did we get here, right? How did this happen? I think one of the elements of what has made this possible that we want to reflect on today is governance. How does a project go from purely talking about software and code on, say, GitHub or Subversion back in the day, to something of this scale? Requires thinking a lot about people. And the project actually took time around 10 years ago, give or take, I don't have the exact dates, to really reflect about governance and formalize our governance model and actually write it down. And that was innovative at the time. Back around 2010, 2012, open source scientific software projects were not taking the time to write down their governance processes. When we started talking to people in industry and funders, it turns out that was tremendously valuable and useful. And that, having taken those steps at the time, supported a lot of this explosive growth and impact that I think we've seen. This is a picture of the model we have, the people in the Jupyter Steering Council that we had at the very end of that stage. Around 2022, we had about 17 people. That model of having this steering council to govern the project was a good fit, I think, when we created it for a small, relatively small, fairly homogeneous team in terms of the scope of its interests and needs. We thank the team who did all that work over this period. It allowed us to get to enormous amounts of recognition. I mean, there's many, many amazing things, some of which you have shown here today. I like to flag this one because I'm a scientist and academic, where Nature recognized that Jupyter was supposedly one of the 10 most important contributions to science from the computing perspective. That is not a small feat for a team that was doing things that years ago we were being told to not do them because they were a waste of time, right? Because they were a waste of time in our careers and we shouldn't be doing that, right? But that model eventually was too small for our needs. We outgrew that skin. It wasn't really a good fit anymore. And over time, we started learning some lessons, both from the success, but also from the limitations of this project. And I want to take a minute to reflect on a couple of these. In particular, I want to highlight a text from the 70s, from the literature on feminist movements of the 70s, called The Tyranny of Structurelessness, which is an enormously useful body of thinking around communities that appear flat, not hierarchical, not bureaucratic, and how once any community that tries to supposedly embrace those ideas that are very common in the tech world and software development gets big enough and complex enough, implicit, informal power structures emerge that actually lead to a lot of problems. And we learned a lot from thinking about what was happening with decision-making and management and power dynamics within Jupyter. From reading these texts, from thinking about this, we realized, and I actually recommend anybody who's thinking about open source projects, go read that. And you can more or less search and replace feminist movements from the 1970s for open source project, and a lot of it applies. We realized that the project was conflating, recognition and responsibility. The steering council were people doing good work, and we wanted to signal that we thank them, but they also had jobs to do and duties. we had very primitive and limited models to delegate authority, to cover areas of the project beyond software development, to grow new leadership, to have structured support for various aspects of community management. Lots of ad hoc differences as the project grew bigger in a lot of these areas. Unnecessary differences that created just friction for no particularly good reason appeared. Fundamentally, this model did not scale to this kind of impact of being recognized as something of this much value and present in so many places. So we're trying to reimagine what should this community look like today. We want to address those challenges, but we don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater. We are trying to retain what is it that made it work. We still got good things done, and we accomplished important things. So what do we need to retain to sustain and grow Jupyter today in a world where we have a user base whose use cases and needs we need to not break, right? Where we have a community with stakeholders that range from individual participants who have come here on their own dime, who are learning about it, to representatives of the biggest tech companies in the world. And how do we establish a healthy power dynamics between those actors? How do we maintain Jupyter as an open public good for society that helps democratize access to computing, to data, to thinking around computation data in the modern world in a healthy way, while remaining innovative? We need to produce good solutions to today's problems, not the ones from 10 years ago, in a world that is cloud first, full of AI agents, where open science is being embraced by government policies, where the web is now a place where you can do computing in the client, et cetera, right? And so fundamentally, where our impact is global in terms of leadership. I am from Colombia, and I want more leadership in the project from Latin America, from Africa, from nations beyond Europe and North America. So that's sort of where Darian takes us next, and how are we trying to define our new model?
Thanks, Fernando. So Fernando laid out a lot of the problems we faced and the constraints that we were trying to overcome, and also laid out what was some of the good aspects that we wanted to keep. And this diagram is a bit complex. We'll come back to it a couple times. But what I want to discuss here is the three orange shapes that you see. This is the new model that we ended up creating. And the first one that I want to talk about is the one that is not connected to anything on this diagram, the distinguished contributors. So the Jupyter distinguished contributors was created to address the conflation of responsibility and recognition, because we had this fantastic community of people who had contributed over the years, and maybe they'd come and gone, maybe they were still active, and we wanted to make sure that they got the recognition they deserved and that they would be part of a growing community, that we could keep adding new Jupyter Distinguished Contributors. So each year we hold nominations, and the current group of the cumulative group of Jupyter Distinguished Contributors votes and nominates new members. And in fact, at the end of this talk, Anna will introduce the 2022 cohort of the Distinguished Contributors. And so the top orange shape that you saw in that diagram is the Executive Council, right? And this is the four of us and Steve and Brian, who couldn't make it. And the Executive Council is responsible for the strategic planning and vision of the project, and delegates from standing committees and working groups work directly with the Executive Council. The Executive Council meets twice weekly, once in a working call and once again in open office hours that you'll find on the Jupyter calendar, which Jason will point you to. And we intend for this to be open and to have voices of the community heard in multiple ways, not just within their sub-projects or within the individual groups they work in. And the other aspect of the project that the council is really focused on is the sustainability of the project and how to not just sustain, but to grow the community that we have. Okay, so the third shape, the third orange shape that was on that diagram is the Software Steering Council. Now, this body, if you look at it, has orange lines coming in from each of the sub-projects. And the Software Steering Council is responsible for the coordination of technical initiatives that cut across multiple sub-projects. So this group also meets regularly, and they're also on the calendar if you wish to join. And what they do, among other things, is to discuss enhancement proposals that cut across multiple aspects of the project, and they really coordinate the technical direction that the project is headed in. Okay, back to this diagram. You'll see there's some other shapes on here that I haven't talked about yet, but what is important to note here is every square, or sorry, rectangle, is either a council or has a council. It's councils all the way down, because one of the most important aspects that we wanted to retain was individual sub-projects governing themselves. Some were doing a better job than others. In particular, we looked to the model that Jupyter Hub had created, and with team compasses, with named members of the team, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't fall into the trap of the tyranny of structurelessness again, that people were known to have a say, and people could be nominated to join councils for each of the individual groups that they might be active in. And we wanted to make sure that decision-making across the projects all adhere to the same principles. So we have a decision-making guide that's part of the governance that we came up with. And we wanted to make sure that there are official channels for having your voice heard in these sub-projects. And so to talk a bit more about what this new governance model means in practice, I'm going to hand it over to Jason.
Thank you, Darian. Let me just take a step back and say the thing I'm most excited, going back to Darian's slide, the thing I'm most excited about this new model for Jupyter Community is that for years we've had questions. How do I get involved? What can I do? And for years, a lot of the power and decision-making ability has been concentrated into very few hands, and sort of informally so. So it wasn't very clear how I can contribute to Jupyter. What this new structure does is it allows everyone to have a place in Jupyter. You too. There's technical and non-technical bodies that have authority to move Jupyter forward. There's decision-making bodies from the sub-project all the way up to the top. There's a place for you in Jupyter where your voice is heard and your decisions and your impact and influence is felt. So let's look at a little bit about what we're doing right now. We just put this new model for community in practice at the beginning of this year. And so we've been busy basically populating this model. On the Executive Council, we've been meeting weekly. We have public office hours every other week. We've been focusing on organizing the community and distributing the decision-making and the power in Jupyter, the influence in Jupyter across different committees. We've concentrated initially on Community Building Committee, and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and a Media Relations Committee. And we've been working together with the Executive Council as sort of the body that oversees Jupyter as a whole and concentrates on the non-technical parts of Jupyter, the community, the people. We've been having joint meetings with the Software Steering Council, which is concentrating on the technical aspects of Jupyter, to talk about sustainability and fundraising. We just had a meeting right before JupyterCon where we had a bunch of people in the room. What does Jupyter take to go into tomorrow's future and grow and expand? We've been sharing information between sub-projects and streamlining the Jupyter enhancement proposal process. Jupyter enhancement proposals are documents that help us clarify community-wide practices, community-wide decisions, both technical and non-technical. And it's been a process for a while. It's being reinvigorated right now. And that's actually one of the big things that the Software Steering Council is taking up. They also are having public weekly meetings. Anybody's welcome to attend. And looking particularly at Jupyter enhancement proposals. Again, this is the body that's over the technical side of the project, the technical direction and strategy of the project. They've been looking particularly at Jupyter enhancement proposals for revising the communication protocols and patterns with the kernel, or looking at proposals for expanding and making the notebook format more useful, the security practices across Jupyter sub-projects, and many, many others. There's a huge backlog of proposals that they're actively working through. But more than just the two bodies, the Executive Council and the Software Steering Council, we have each individual sub-project organizing. And so each sub-project these days has a council of decision makers. The nice thing about this model is it scales from a project that has 2 contributors to a project that has dozens of contributors. And there's a formal place for decisions to be made and for the project to move forward. Each sub-project is coming up with a team compass. Here's Jupyter Hub's team compass, for example. They're a shining example in our community about working with the community and the developers and the non-technical people as well. So each sub-project is putting up a team compass. And many sub-projects are having regular public dev meetings, and many sub-projects are having less intense office hours where you can come and just learn how to contribute, meet people, and just associate with people in the project. So how do you get involved? Well, if you go to jupyter.org/community, you'll see our calendar. There's many synchronous meetings. Anybody's welcome to attend these. The Zoom information and things like that are in the meeting details. Many sub-projects, like I mentioned, have team compasses that detail a mailing list or other communication channels, repos where you can post issues, et cetera. And again, a project like this that's so encompassing has many technical issues, and we're all familiar with, you can put in an issue, put in a PR, but there's also many non-technical issues, or many non-technical areas that the project is now growing a more formal strategy around, such as events and community, which Anna will be talking about now.
So when you hear the Executive Council talk about this expansion, I want you to think not of bureaucracy or added layers, but more of connection and creating a structure that allows this massive community to connect. So at this point, Project Jupyter has 11 official sub-projects, and we have an ever-growing number of users, new contributors, and maintainers that exist all over the globe. And one key area of strategy for the Executive Council is how do we engage and connect that community? I'm happy to share that we've established a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. It currently has 4 members. We will be at the sprints. The entire team is here at this event, and we will be at the sprints on Saturday. So if you haven't registered yet for the sprints, they're complimentary. They're here in this building. There's no fee to register, but there is limited space, so make sure to find the tickets and register for that on the JupyterCon website. Also, if you have ideas or feedback related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're welcome to email that committee, and the email is up on the screen. One community highlight that I do want to share, and it is, again, related to Jupyter Hub, as a few shout-outs have already happened, and also Sarah Gibson did a talk about this program earlier today. The leaders of Jupyter Hub have committed to the hard work of inclusive mentorship over time, and that group has not only learned some important lessons, but they've also grown the team with new contributors in important ways. And one of those contributors is Georgiana Dolakan. So I wanted to call that out. If you didn't go to Sarah Gibson's talk today about outreaching and what Jupyter Hub is doing there, I encourage you to watch the replay. Oops. So we live in a world and a work environment and space that is often online and asynchronous. Outside of occasional video conference, it's very rare to get opportunities like the one that we have today to connect with our colleagues face to face. The team at Jupyter believes in the power and the value of making those connections, and throughout the history of our project, there have been important technical and non-technical work that has been inspired and started at events like these and different scientific conferences. So I want to take a moment to recognize that events are a part of the community building committee's purview. We're the first working group, despite committee being in our name. We are the first working group in this new structure, and we have a focus on events. Now, community building is not just events, and so if you have ideas or things that you would like for this committee to be doing or feedback on anything, you can reach out to us at our email, which is up on the screen, and I believe we'll be sharing slides. So before I go on, I want to recognize the team of people who made this event possible. Not only the events committee, but also our partners at NumFocus, the volunteers, everyone in this venue who has supported us in this event. I want to thank all of you. Also want to shout out to the Jupyter Community Workshops. That is an event series that is primarily sponsored by Bloomberg and Amazon Web Services. We've hosted 4 rounds of workshops and dozens of events. Now, there's community leaders who've stepped up with ideas for hosting. So essentially, we've put out a public call for proposals. Those go out on our blog and Twitter. And people step up to lead local or regional events in their community related to any number of topics that they care about. So look for more news on that in the future in those mediums. And now, it's my pleasure and honor to announce the 2022 Jupyter Distinguished Contributors Cohort. As Darian mentioned, these are folks who are recognized for their substantial contributions to Jupyter in both quantity and quality. And so far, to date, there have been 4 rounds of people who have been recognized with this distinction, and that represents almost 60 contributors across the globe. So many thanks to each of you for all your contributions. Your hard work is not only appreciated, it is celebrated. I will now reveal the slide, and let's hold applause until the end while I read the names. Or it's okay, we can applaud twice. I didn't get instruction on how to pronounce this name, so I hope I'm not doing it too much of an injustice. Ayaz Salikov, Carlos Herrero, Eric Charles, Itai Daphne, Roland Thomas, Ryan Levitt, Sharon Foga, and Tanya Allard. Thank you so much. So that is the end of our prepared talk. We're happy to take questions. I think we have a couple of microphones and our running shoes on. So if anyone has a question, please come down so that we can hand you the microphone and address your questions.
Don't be shy.
Hi, thank you. I just wondered how you came up with this governance structure, because I guess you need some kind of governance structure to decide a governance structure.
Sure. So this started a few years ago before COVID at an in-person meeting. And that meeting had, I think, a majority, or at least a plurality of the Jupyter Steering Council at it. And we thought that within a few days, we could just write a new governance model and be fine. It turns out we couldn't. And what happened was the decision that we did come to at that meeting was that the 2 co-founders of Jupyter, Fernando and Brian, who couldn't make it, they would be effectively editors-in-chief of a process that would yield published documentation on our governance. And we started regular weekly calls. Lots of people came. Over time, we published individual bits of it. So the Jupyter Distinguished Contributors was one of the first things that we published, which is why there's been multiple cohorts. And the model of Jupyter Hub and their Team Compass and the way they were organizing their sub-project was one that we took to heart, and we tried to scale that. And slowly but surely, we produced pull requests on the Jupyter governance repo, and the existing steering council voted on each piece And the final piece of it was last year when we could say now the model's fully in effect. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
I want to add that one of the distinguished contributors on this screen, Sharon Foga, is an example of somebody who came from a different community. Sharon is somebody who we met through Eric Sandell, a former distinguished contributor, and who connected us with her. She works in the Apache community, and she effectively was willing to volunteer her time to come to these endless weekly meetings for several years, actually, to give us input on how has a very large community like Apache dealt with every one of these problems and questions and issues, because we wanted to learn from what worked in such a successful community without simply copying their solutions, because we needed to do things that respected what worked for us. So it was a very painstaking process. For the outside world, it seemed absurd that it took us like 3 years to write 5 pages of documents, but it involved not only meetings, we interviewed many people, we talked to many stakeholders to try to address those issues while maintaining what was it that made Jupyter work. And it was the process that kind of Darian described. And I want to make sure that people realize that this would not have happened without Darian, because when he says Fernando and Brian agreed to be editors-in-chief, what he really means is he agreed to take on the load of keeping Brian and myself in check and keeping us working and supporting us for several years while providing input on how to make it happen. And so literally this would not have happened if it wasn't because Darian was willing to take that load on.
Oh, yes, where is Sharon? Is she, maybe she's, there she is. Thank you, Sharon. We have maybe 1 more minute for a brief question. Yeah.
I have more of a statement. So I love Jupyter. I've used it for 10 years. I still think it's one of the most interesting and innovative software projects I've seen. I recently spent 3 months trying to develop a Jupyter widget against it, and it's been really difficult. I filed 8 bugs against 4 projects, and one bug was responded to within 2 days, and 5 have sat for 30 days without any response. And I want to engage, I want to help write documentation to fix the problems I ran into. And I don't know how to do that, and I don't know how other people can do that when there's no engagement. And I know everyone's busy, but talk to me afterwards. If technical people will sit down with me for an hour, I will write the best docs from that conversation I can. I'm trying to work with you. Right?
Yeah, we had a short conversation before this talk, so maybe even a planted question here. Thank you so much again for bringing this up. As you can imagine, and as probably many of you feel, everyone is stretched very, very thinly. And the load on the leaders in the projects and the leaders in the sub-projects is tremendous. Often they're contributing in their own time, on the weekends, or maybe they have some employer-sponsored time, but it's only, this much, and there's a million things to do. And working and engaging with new contributors is one of the highest priorities. However, there's still resource constraints, and that's why one of the biggest initiatives that we're looking at very first is sustainability. How do we help the ecosystem grow in order to sustainably contribute and grow and engage and provide places for people in the community? So that's one of the things I'm most excited about this new model, sharing that load across people and providing a place for everyone to engage with each other.
Also, there's a regular widgets call.
And finally, I would encourage everyone to
sprints.
join the sprints on Saturday. I think most of us will be there, and this is a great opportunity for new contributors all the way through longtime maintainers to connect with each other.
Come and talk to us, please.
Yes, please come talk to us.
Yes, we're here for the event. Please come and talk to us, bring ideas, criticisms, feedback, etc. This is a work in progress. We're getting started. This is effectively just the implementation. So please help us make it something that will serve all of you for the next 5 or 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you.